All right, so welcome back to part two of this episode with Christian Rodriguez. So we had to cut it off. I was not good at time planning last time, and I was like, all right, I have a call, so I have to get off. And so we weren't able to finish up everything that I wanted to there. So Christian is back on, took time out of his day to come back on. That was probably 2 weeks ago now at this point. So
Mhm. Yeah.
we're gonna wrap up talking about body composition and then have a few other things we want to talk about. But I just want to say thank you again for coming back on, man.
Yeah, of course. It's probably mostly my fault. I talked way too long.
No, it's my fault. And it's an interesting topic. And then like I said, I should have made more time for it. And I was like, crap, I got to hop off. But we love you being able to go in detail on things. The more, the better on that. So we wrapped up. At the end of that conversation, we were talking about really at the end of the day, taking like in the field for like clients and things like that, taking their body composition through like finding out their body fat percentage. We basically, and let me know if I'm wrong on this, we summed up that like, probably not super useful for people to take that to really measure their progress, correct? Is that kind of what you feel like we summed up with that?
Yeah, that's where I stand on it. To think of if you tell someone their body fat percentage, what is it really doing for them? What is it doing for you? Where I think there's more utility in looking at it as, okay, this is your body fat percentage, this is how much fat mass you have, but where is it located? Where is it coming from? So if it's more centered around their abdominal region, if it's more centered around their organs, maybe that's something where we look at it. That's a bit more important. Look at where is it located? Maybe instead of body fat percentage, you look at circumferences. So you couple like a waist to hip ratio, something along those lines with raw circumferences around certain body regions and look how those change around time as opposed to just an regular body fat percentage that's not really telling anyone much.
I don't think we dove into this last time, but can tell where the fat, if it's like visceral stuff, like there are ways to there is
Yes.
ways to find out where that's at.
Yeah. DEXA does give us a visceral fat value as well. There's probably a decent amount of papers out there looking at visceral fat. There's visceral fat, there's also ectopic fat, and they're not realizing, but they're putting more value into those factors as maybe previously, as maybe they were undervalued in previous years. And now they're actually looking at those values and being like, okay, maybe this is what we should be looking at as opposed to, hey, here's their percentage. It's 25%. Cool.
Yeah, because again, things like visceral fat, that's a little bit more. That's the quote unquote bad kind of fat that we want to be careful with versus like the kind of subcutaneous body fat. And my understanding, people are at different thresholds at which that may happen, but also there's like certain lifestyle things and obviously like we just talked about genetics, right? That are going to determine if somebody and sex
Yeah.
differences as well too, right? In terms of if someone starts to accumulate visceral fat.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of other factors that come into play in terms of what's going to influence where that fat is located as well. Like you mentioned, a lot of genetics. Some people are just born with a six pack and they just have that throughout their whole life. And it doesn't matter what phases of life they go through, they're just always leaner in the abdominal region. Whereas for others, it's the opposite case and they just tend to store more around there. So there are other factors that come into play.
Is it would stress and like sleep would be a big component of that, right? Like just high stress in general, poor sleep, right? That's going to be something that's going to potentially lead to your body wanting to prefer storing as visceral versus like subcutaneous, right?
Yeah, I don't want to say definitively, but I would imagine so. And for a lot of stuff, when we look at stress and sleep, most things you like consider, you have high stress, you're not getting enough sleep, most likely going to negatively impact whatever metric, whatever performance measure you're looking at, most likely going to negatively impact that.
Yeah. But generally speaking, though, obviously the higher your body fat goes, the higher your risk of visceral fat's going to be
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
But within that,
yeah,
it's all going to be dependent on, again, lifestyle stuff, genetics, sex differences, things like
hmm
that. Gotcha.
yeah.
So what would be, and I don't think we hit on this, but what would be the reason somebody would want to get their body fat percentage done then? Do you think it is just to get some sort of objective number to see if they're like making progress? Again, I know in the like for research purposes, we would want to know, but outside of that, is there really anything that you like why you'd want to take it? Bragging rights?
Yeah, it's honestly, that's what I was going to say. I was going to mention, especially nowadays, like the 10% value. It's almost like similar to the 10,000 steps a day value. Everyone just knows those. It's like, hey, if you're sub 10, then you're like super lean. And I'd probably say at least like 80% of people that say they're 10% or lower are not 10% or lower from what we've seen in the lab. But anyways, I digress. So we won't go down that. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, I think people just want to have a number. They just want to get a number and look at it. And a lot of times they're going to look at it, they're going to put too much value into that number when it's just data. They're going to see that number and they're probably going to be like, oh, that's higher than I want it to be, even though they might not account for the fact that, hey, I drank some water before I did this. I lifted, I ate some food, or hey, I'm a female and I'm naturally going to have more higher body fat percentage due to having more essential fat because of my reproductive organs. They might not know or consider those factors. So they're going to get an in-body done, a DEXA, a SICA. They're going to see that value and be like, oh man, it's much higher than I want it to be. Or they could have influenced it to where it dropped because of what they did prior to it. They're like, oh my gosh, 8%. That's amazing. Love that. Super lean. And so there's just a lot of error that can come into play here. And I do think a large reason why people would want to even get any test done is because they see numbers thrown around on social media a lot. They see professional athletes and they're like, they claim, or their coach or trainer claim that they are 4% body fat, or if you want to talk about DK Metcalf, negative 1.6 or something like that
Really?
percent body fat. Yeah.
That's
So
what he
I
said.
believe he said that, or his trainer. I know it was 1.6, and I believe it was negative 1.6. Actually, I think he was 1.6% body fat, and then I think Ronnie Coleman said negative. He was negative something.
That's
Yeah.
hilarious.
So when we know that the essential fat for male is probably about 3 or 4, maybe you can make a case for 4 or 5, somewhere around there. Regardless, you know that if someone says they're 1 to 2 to 3% body fat, 99% of the time it's not true. But people see those values thrown out and they're like, oh, I want to go see mine done. I want to go get mine done and see what value I am. And I think that's a large reason why people want to get those tests done. People are paying 100 to 200 bucks to get a DEXA done, and then maybe they get another DEXA done 6 months down the line, and it's a different device, different software. They did something different prior to when they got that test done the first time, and so there's a lot of error that's involved, and I don't think a lot of people consider those factors. This is
Yeah.
coming from someone that's worked in a body composition lab for the past 6 years.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, even like like you said, even just doing like somebody takes it DEXA and then they do it differently. Like they would in their mind, they think it's the same, but it's like, that's completely different. But even things that are even smaller than that, like, and so this is kind of my next question. You mentioned, hey, you can rig it in a way to show a lower body fat percentage, right? And a
Yeah.
little bit more lean mass. What would you tell someone there to rig it in terms of like, because again, I think you could basically, if you do it that way, then you can inversely have an idea of what would give you a higher number potentially.
I don't know. I don't remember if I mentioned this on part one, but I remember Dr. Tinsey telling me about there was a certain DEXA option. I don't know what software has it or what manufacturer has it, but if you toggle that little thing on, that little option instead of off, if you turn it on, then it drops the body fat percentage down 5% based off of what it would have given. So maybe 15%, then it gives 10%. And I think there's a decent chance that some, I don't know, universities or just athletic coaches or trainers might be using that maybe to show like group body fat percentages were this. So they were 5% lower than they actually were. Something along those lines. I don't know if I would really tell just a normal consumer that going to get it done.
What about like carbohydrate intake? That's something that can impact it, right? If you do it one time where you have maybe a high carb day before, and then you do it on like a low carb day, the day, right? That's going to be something that can
Yeah.
acutely impact it, right? As well too,
Yeah.
carb
I
intake.
mean, what is it? 1 gram of carb is about 2.7 grams of water. And glycogen is, if you want to go as far as, I believe, a 6 compartment model in body composition, then glycogen is one of the components. Glycogen is part of fat-free mass. So that's definitely going to influence it, just glycogen in general, but also eat more carbs, more water is going to influence it. There's a lot of factors. You ate more carbs, there's a good chance you ate more sodium too. You had that comes into play too. I just think there's so many factors that can influence it that a lot of people don't consider. If you're doing everything right and you're like standardizing it all and you're trying to keep things as similar as possible when you go get the test done, you're using the same device and you don't put too much value into the number you get, then there might be some utility in using it, just like just tracking it, having that number. But you're using it along with other items, other things, like maybe performance measures in the gym, raw circumferences that you're doing along with these tests, as opposed to just, I think some people use life percentage, just that single value. That's all they track. And I would recommend not doing that and adding, getting a more comprehensive outlook based off what you have access to. So that's another thing we have to consider based off what you have access to at home or what you can get access to.
That is one thing that I've heard conflicting reports on too is okay, so some people will say, hey, like I hear, I know it's not super accurate. If it's trending down over time, that's a good thing. But then you also hear that also may not, like, because of the potential errors that go into it, that may
Yeah.
not be the case. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you have to look at it from a broad perspective. If you're saying like it's trending down over time, like how long are we looking at? Are we, if we're looking at 12 weeks or something, and there is a, how, whatever way you look at it, it is going down. It's going down. Like it's
Yeah.
going down. If we're looking at, if we could say like 4 weeks or something, it might not be trending down as much as you think. There might be some artificial changes in there. So to go a bit longer, you
Okay.
got to go a bit longer to see actual changes in like fat mass, actual changes in muscle, things of that nature. You need a decent amount of time. But if you take 12 weeks and you're seeing some type of trend, it's most likely a trend, provided you're not just using, like when you're doing your assessments, they're not all different type of technologies based on different principles, using all different like equations and all this stuff. If you're keeping things relatively similar and using the same type of metrics and you see a trend, it's most likely a trend, especially if you go by like visual appearance, take those into account, how you're feeling, then you can be like, you can be pretty confident.
I was just going to say that it's like, again, we come back to, okay, if that is the case. So it sounds like over time, yes, if you do see a certain trend down, it's trending down. But to me, you're going to notice that like when you see
Yeah,
yourself
yeah.
anyway. So it's okay that that's happening anyway. So this again comes back to the whole point of looking at other things there. Are there any male versus female differences or anything like that when it comes to body
Uh,
comp in terms of like changes, things like that, or anything that you found in your paper or anything like that?
Firstly, because this has been on my mind. So earlier I said this is coming from someone who's been doing body comp for the last 6 years. I meant it in a way that I've been doing that, been immersed in that for the last 6 years, and I'm still saying I wouldn't put too much utility in those values because after I first said it, I was like, wait, that might have been sounded cocky. That's not what I was saying. The funny thing is, so my sample, it wasn't like super large. We were limited by funds so that we could do deuterium dilution. So there were 40 participants, 23 males, 17 females, and we're working on writing up the manuscript right now to publish it. And we're not going to do specific sex analysis because we actually had a pretty homogeneous sample in that the values were pretty similar whenever we broke it up, males and females. So there wasn't much utility in actually comparing them both. So at least my specific paper, we didn't see any crazy differences in terms of just, okay, so body fat percentage, females are naturally going to have a bit higher. The average for the whole sample was 15. The average for males was 12. For females, it was about 20 or 21, which is what I expect because I tell everyone if you want to get the female equivalent, I typically just add 8%, 12, 8, 20. And when we broke it down, it was like the methods that didn't do well in males didn't do well in females. There wasn't anything too crazy along the lines of like male versus female. I do think if we had maybe a longitudinal analysis, a bit more time, there's a good chance we would have seen something, or just a larger sample size. Ideally, like even if we had, I would have loved it if we had 100 and it was split pretty like evenly, like 50-50, because I think there's a good chance we would have seen something. But in mine specifically, we didn't really see any specific differences.
What do you feel like you could potentially see? Like, well, obviously, I know you. I'm sure this would just be speculation on your part, but what does anything jump out to you that you feel like you could potentially see if you had more people, longer time frame, et cetera?
I think the only thing I could think of that might be influenced are the 3D imaging devices, specifically because males and females are known to have like different body shapes. And that's what those devices, they're essentially like creating pictures, creating avatars. And I'm just thinking like maybe the different body shapes could play a role, or because those devices, the way they work is we just keep gathering data, we keep refining the algorithms, the equations that they use to estimate body fat percentage. We don't have any data on muscular resistance trained adults yet for these devices, for these three-dimensional optical imaging devices. So this is the first study, as far as I know, at least on two of these devices in muscular resistance trained adults. So as we get more data, then we can be able to refine them and improve their accuracy because our three-dimensional optical imaging devices were among the worst performing devices that we looked at. And I do think a large reason for that is they're just being introduced to this
Yeah.
population. So as we get the algorithms, the equations more refined, just keep feeding data with these individuals with more muscle resistance trained individuals, these different body shapes, then maybe we can improve the accuracy. But I do think if we had a larger sample size, we would have been able to see how those devices performed in those populations. And I do think we might have seen some differences.
So last time we talked about any surprising findings, and the one was about how well the consumer grade and body H2ON, right, performed. So that was one of them. Is there anything else that you found like super interesting from the study, or like any other surprising finding or anything like that?
Yeah, there was one real surprising one that stuck out. It was actually for one of my other aims that goes along, it's part of body composition. We also looked at how, well, so basically we did deuterium dilution, which is the gold standard for measuring total body water, which is an important value to measure in body composition. And it's the most accurate way to do it. And we basically compared all other methods of estimating total body water to that value to see how accurate they were. So all our BIA devices, so like the consumer grade device, we compared that one. But we also looked at there are prediction equations out there just in the literature, published prediction equations to estimate total body water. So basically the way these equations work, whatever device you do, an InBody, a Sika, whatever BIA device, it's going to give you, it might give you a total body water value, but it also gives you raw metrics. So like resistance, all the reactants, things of that nature. And it'll give it to you, depending on the device, it'll give it to you at multiple frequencies. So 50 kilohertz, 1,000, things like that. So basically, these equations, they will take the resistance at 50 kilohertz with other like height, weight, things like that, and they will estimate total body water. And they've been developed in specific samples. You might have like healthy adults with obesity. There's only one equation that's been developed in athletes, and when they developed the equation, it's the Matthias and colleagues 2016 equation. The title's like a generalized equation for estimating total body water, a need for athlete specific ones. And when they were developing the equation, it's a general athlete equation because they had the individuals that were in the sample, they had 15 different sports represented from those individuals. So it wasn't like a specific, hey, this is gymnast or these are football players. It was like all different sports. Anyways, that's the only equation developed for athletic samples. So basically what we were looking at and what we were curious is how valid are these athlete specific or just one versus the generalized equations that were developed in general population, healthy adults, sedentary adults with obesity or overweight. And actually, what we found was basically the athlete equation, the Matthias equation, underestimated total body water by a lot. All the other equations did as well, except for one. The Kushner, was it Kushner 19 something, 1980 something, 1986 equation? It was almost spot on with deuterium dilution, as well as our ImpediMed SFB7, our BIS device, which we would hope to find. But the Kushner equation, we did not expect it because it was developed in just regular healthy adults and adults with obesity, like a sample of both. And they weren't active adults, they weren't muscular resistance trained adults, but it was spot on. It demonstrated equivalence. It was valid. We were really surprised by that. It was super interesting. I thought it was super interesting because I was like, this is not what we expected. The athlete equation underestimated. And basically, what we're thinking is, or what we might speculate is, though it was an athlete specific or an athlete equation, it wasn't specific to any athletic group, and it might still underestimate if the group we're applying it to exceeds the muscularity, or their muscularity exceeds that of the developed population. Because our population was pretty muscular, and their population had people from all walks of life in terms of sports. And yeah, so basically, I'd like to see if we apply this equation to other muscular samples, does it perform well like it did in ours? But it was really surprising. Like it wasn't just that it performed well; it was almost right on the money with our deuterium dilution. Where it was like, man, that thing was really close. That's probably the other than the InBody H2ON performing as well as it did. This was also a really surprising one, which is good because the InBody, it's a more prediction equations are going to be a more accessible way of just estimating body composition for practitioners. So they don't have to go buy a super expensive Sika or BIS device. They can use a single frequency BIA device that operates at 50 kilohertz, just get that reactance value, put in an equation, boom. It was
Yeah,
also the first study showing that it was the first study showing a total body water equation was valid in this population.
oh, nice.
So if other studies can build on that and use it and look at its validity compared to dilution, then maybe we can eventually get enough studies to show like, hey, we're pretty confident this is a valid way of estimating total body water in muscular resistance trained adults.
Yeah. Now, did you mention there was a metabolic component to your study as well too? What did you guys
Yes,
kind
sir.
of do there?
We did indirect calorimetry, which is the gold standard for estimating resting metabolic rate. So we also did a, let's see, I have it somewhere over here. We also did a portable way of estimating total or resting metabolic rate. It's called the VO2 Master.
Oh,
It's a
nice.
mask. It's a mask that they just put on. And so they sat in a chair and kind of reclined back a little bit. They weren't lying down and put this on. And so basically, we did indirect calorimetry for 15 minutes where they lie down with this hood. It's kind of like an astronaut hood. And then right after, they would sit in a chair with this for 15 minutes and breathe normal. And so we did those two methods. And then we also looked at, might have been like 8 or 9 prediction equations for RMR, just looking at their validity, comparing the prediction equations and the VO2 master, the portable analyzer to indirect calorimetry. Basically, what we found, and it corroborated or supported previous literature, all these equations and the portable one as well, underestimated resting metabolic rate by quite a bit. So the best performing equations were actually the Tinsley 2019 equations, and those were actually developed in physique athletes. Those were developed in bodybuilders. It was a small sample size. It was like 27 of them, but it was the first equation developed for physique, and it was the best performing equation. It's still underestimated a decent amount. And
Keep going.
I was just gonna say, previous literature has shown like these equations in people with in resistance trained populations, these equations might underestimate. And there has been shown that there might be a relation, not might, there is a relationship between fat-free mass and resting metabolic rate. So a higher fat-free mass, someone might have a higher resting metabolic rate to an extent, to a degree. And more so, if we're looking at longitudinal, if someone is gaining fat-free mass, so we can think of it if they're gaining muscle per se, if they're gaining muscle, there's a decent chance their RMR is increasing a little bit. And these equations, because we actually did this in a study in 2022 or 2021, these equations can't account for that increase in resting metabolic rate. So as someone increases fat-free mass, they typically increase resting metabolic rate, and these equations can't account for that increase. They still underestimate. And though this was cross-sectional, it basically supported that in people with higher resting metabolic rates, these equations generally underestimate.
Underestimating, so basically meaning that the number that these equations get are lower than what it actually is, right?
Yeah, I could probably pull up a table here really quickly, but basically, yeah, let's say that indirect calorimetry, so the gold standard, that most accurate one, let's say that it said 2100, then and we apply the Harrison Benedict equation, that one might say like 1700 or 16. So it's a decent amount that it underestimates. And I can give you actually, I have the table right here. So our indirect calorimetry, the mean for our, or the average for our whole sample was 2,183 calories. So that's the mean resting metabolic rate for all our 40 participants. Let's see. Harrison Benedict, which came in 1918. It was the first time it was introduced. It's over 100 years old. It's still commonly used. It was developed in general population. It's even on the ACSM position stand, and it's one of the recommended equations. So our mean was almost 2,200. Harrison Benedict had 1,730. So underestimated a decent amount. Yeah, the Cunningham 1980, which is another really common equation, had 1921. So there were some pretty considerable underestimations. Essentially, they just had it lower. They just estimated it lower. And then let's say you go off that value and you're using it for an athletic sample that might fit our population, like their characteristics. So you can think of like football players. I would think of gymnasts, they're generally more muscular. Track and field athletes, actually, like sprinters, generally more muscular. And you applying these equations, one thing you want to consider is there's a good chance that it's underestimated. So you might want to account for that and just increase calories a bit based off what you get from these equations. Because if you just use these equations outright, and for your audience, the way you use a resting metabolic rate prediction equation is you take the value it gives you, then you can just Google what's called an activity factor. So they're just multipliers. And you go off of what is your day like? Not just how many times do you lift? What is your day like? Do you have a job working in construction, a nursing job? Are you walking around a lot? Or are you sitting at your desk? Because you can lift 6 days a week, but if you have a desk job and you don't do much outside of that desk job and lift, your activity factor is probably still going to be pretty low. Someone can have a construction job and work out 3 days a week. They're going to have a pretty high one. But regardless, you take that value from the equation, multiply it by your activity factor, and that'll give you your total daily energy expenditure, or you could think of it as the amount of calories you expend that whole day, estimated amount, the amount of calories you would need to eat to maintain that weight. And so essentially, let's say somebody's using these equations, they do activity factor. There's a lot of error involved with this. So they do the activity factor, they get a value. They need to consider, okay, there's a good chance when I use that equation, it was underestimated. So I might be underfeeding my athletes. But also at the end of the day, I tell my class, I tell everyone this, our participants, whatever number you get is just a starting point. Just
Yep.
adjust based off the next 2 weeks, your average. How is it changing? Because a lot of times people will Google, how much should I eat?
Yep.
And it'll ask you for like age, sex, height. It's using one of these equations.
Yep.
And a lot of
Calculate
times,
calorie calculators, things like
yeah,
that. Yep.
a lot of times people take that, they should take it with a grain of salt, but they put too much stock in it.
Yep.
I'm like, that literally is just getting you somewhere to start, which at the end of the day, honestly, a start is all you need. You just need somewhere to start. And then
Get
go
an
off
idea.
of maybe you just weigh yourself like 3, 4 days a week, go off the average. How is it trending? Is it doing what you want it to do? Cool. Stay with it. Is it going up when you want it to go down? Okay, just adjust the value and then go from there. Again, another starting point. Just keep going. Yeah, that's how our equations performed. And that's just how I would utilize prediction equations in general. Because at the end of the day, it's just how real world application, how do you use this in practice?
Okay, so to sum all this up, you guys looked at to see the most popular kind of equations that are out there. How do they match up? And it sounds like
Yeah.
biggest thing being a lot of these are going to underestimate because of that athletic population you have. So these may be better for more general population people with like less kind of muscle essentially. And I'm assuming that just has to mainly do, I guess, with what the benefits of muscle in terms of your metabolic rate and things like that there. But just so people know, when they get their resting metabolic rate, their RMR, that's just one component of daily energy expenditure, right? So you have to, that's where like why they're just considered equations, because you also are not considering like NEAT and stuff like that. Is there, and I'm assuming it doesn't account for thermic effective food as well too, and then just
Yeah.
general exercise activity. Is there a way, do we have a way to measure that?
I
All of it?
believe, yeah, I believe I'll actually learn how to do that at Pennington.
Okay.
Oh man. So I should learn the doubly labeled water technique,
Doubly labeled.
which
Okay.
is a way to measure like total caloric expenditure. And they have metabolic chambers where I'll be going at Pennington Biomedical Research Center. So that they can look at, like, let's say, look at 24-hour caloric expenditure. Like how many calories are they spending over the entire day? And I don't know the method off the top of my head, but I know that I read it somewhere that the method to measure thermic effective feeding. But yeah, basically what you're saying, yeah, resting metabolic rate, though in general, it makes up the largest proportion of total daily energy expenditure, regardless of where you look. When you Google it, regardless of what infographic or pie chart or bar
Yep.
thing you get, it's going to be the biggest one. I don't care
Yep.
what percentage it says. Then you have the thermic effective feeding. Then you have the physical activity, which takes into account, let's say, purposeful physical activity, exercise, and NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And I think NEAT is the biggest one. Sometimes people don't often consider. Hey,
Fidgeting,
yeah, fidgeting when you're. I always look at like students when I see them tapping their foot.
high
I'm like,
energy
hey,
expenditure.
I'm like, hey, when you go grocery shopping, like anytime you're just moving, that's neat. Yeah, and then thermic effective feeding as well. And I don't. Yeah, resting metabolic rate is the biggest component, but physical activity is going to be the most modifiable of one. So like the one you can change based off of what you're doing. Whereas RMR, you want to change that, it's going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah, because RMR, like I guess the way you could change that's going to be like body size. I'm assuming muscle mass is going to play a little bit of a role in that as well too. And then I'm assuming there's a huge just genetic component to it where you can't really
Yeah.
change it as well.
Yeah. Larger individuals, sometimes taller individuals, more muscle. Males are typically going to have higher than females. And let's see. So that's, I guess, reasons why someone would have a higher RMR. Oh, actually, I guess you could compare someone in a cold environment compared to a warm environment. Cold, their metabolism is going to increase to keep
Be
them
higher.
warm. Now, negatively, someone loses a lot of muscle and they're losing a lot of weight, then they might see a decreased RMR.
And I'm assuming there's probably some medical conditions that could potentially lower it as well too. What would be the role of, say, this is where I think it, but again, somebody has some sort of like thyroid issue or something like that, which I feel like a lot of those end up being lifestyle kind of factors that go into it. Somewhere along the lines, the lifestyle thing can be fixed. Same thing with like testosterone. Is that going to be something that could potentially like impact that as
Yeah,
well?
yeah, definitely medical conditions that can influence it, whether it be influence it. to have a higher or lower. Typically, it's going to be lower. Yeah, like you mentioned, a thyroid issue, somebody, any type of muscle wasting condition, if they have sarcopenia, cachexia, then there's a good chance that'll influence it. Now, on the testosterone, our highest values for resting metabolic rate are enhanced individuals. We had, so for like males, we had a few over 3,000. I think the highest one was like, I know I saw a 3,300 one.
Resting the RMR.
Yes, the metabolic
So
rate.
that's not
And
even
that means,
accounting. That's not even
yeah.
accounting for all the other stuff.
So when you multiply that by, but it's most likely like the moderate one is going to be 1.55. You multiply 3,300 by
That's
1.55.
insane.
Yeah. So typically, and that's taking it in, oh wait, no, that's not an equation. But yeah, that was when we saw that, I was like, what?
That's insane, man.
I think the highest for female was, we had a few over 2,000. It might have been like 2,300 or something along that lines, which is still really high.
So this, I always bring up whenever I'm like talking about this, I always bring up the Panzer data from a couple years ago, though. He had that like huge thing that he put out, right? From, I think it was like from 2020, maybe, where it was like looking at common one that people will be like, hey, your metabolism doesn't decrease as you age. Like that one that people always cite there with that. I can't think of the exact name of the paper, but I know they looked at a ton. I think it was doubly labeled water too that they looked at for most of those people, I think. And like they have a chart there that shows total daily energy expenditure for some people. Man, it's like you see this huge cluster of like people in this range of 2,000 to 3,000.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
then there's those extremes. There was one, I think the highest maybe up there was like upwards of 8, 9, maybe something like that per day. Potentially, I could be off on the exact number there, but I don't know if you can like if you know anything about that or anything. I have it somewhere that I have that graph, but yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like I've probably seen it. It's not ringing a bell right now. Yeah, there's always like crazy outliers or exceptions to anything. Like there's people with just insanely high just metabolisms. And so was it 8 to 9,000? So was that their total daily energy expenditure?
Okay, so here it is from Ponzer, total TEE, so total energy expenditure. So I'm assuming that's what it is. And it looks like the highest person, and they were about their body mass was like 70-ish kg,
Uh-huh.
and the highest was 7,000 there. So not 8,000, like I said.
That's still
That's pretty
wow.
insane, but it's pretty interesting. Yeah.
They must be,
Let me see if I can copy this over into the chat so you can see it.
I just found it. That's man, they would have had to be some type of athlete.
Yeah, some type of athlete or something like that. Yeah.
Actually, like some type of endurance athlete.
Yeah. So that begs a question. Is that kind of the high end of what somebody could expect from that standpoint, you think?
Yeah, based off this paper. Yeah, I mean,
Because my understanding is like in some of the like total daily energy expenditure is like obviously going to be capped, I feel like at some point. And I feel like it's okay if that is that like a snapshot because it's can somebody consume that many calories, all consume that many, but then expend that many over an extended period of time? And I would say probably not,
yeah,
but
we see there's those trends on YouTube where it's 8, 10,000, burn 10,000, but there are actual like individuals that are, I don't know if it's 10,000, but they're definitely expending that amount per day, like your Ironman, your ultra endurance athletes, and they're having to eat like a large amount of carbs per hour to maintain that performance. So it's definitely getting up there. I don't know, from the people I watch, from what I've seen, I feel like they're still probably not getting up to the however many calories they would actually need because it just gets to the point where
can't
how
eat
do you
that
do
much.
that?
Can't eat that
And with
much
yeah, and just with time, like
in time. Yeah.
you have to take out the time to eat the calories, and then it just gets to a point where they probably don't want to. And yeah,
And then you get to the point to where it's okay, so it's hard to eat that many calories. And so because of that, like if you're expending, if somebody was somehow expending 8, 9,000 calories a day, eventually you're going to be in a deficit. And so there's going to be some compensation along the ways to where your body's not actually going to expend that much energy anyways. But also
yeah,
like to eat that many calories, not only from a time standpoint, but like a digestion standpoint, at some point there's got to be a give and take somewhere, right?
yeah.
Where it's just, you can't, it's just not humanly possible. I know a lot of, I'm sure people listening are like, oh, that'd be so easy to eat 7,000 calories. It's, yeah, okay, you can maybe
Well,
do that in one day, but
that's what I would be saying or thinking if I was listening to this. But yeah, you have to consider, yeah, eating it in one day, if you're just, that's your only goal is eating that in one day. That's not their only goal. Their goal for that day is get this session done, get this session
yep,
done, get this session done. That takes this many hours. So we have to account for the fact that when you're considering like the full day and time for several hours of the day, they're doing whatever training session they're meant to be doing. And while they might be even intra-training or intra-session fuel carbohydrates, it's still not going to be a crazy amount compared to what they'd be able to do outside of that session. And then they have other obligations, most likely. So you have to consider those factors as well. And then it just gets to a point where they're like, I just don't want to eat. This is taking a lot of time. My digestion right now feels terrible. And you have to, for those athletes, they have to focus on digestion as well, like your gastric emptying. Because if that's not going well, if you have GI issues, then the whole point, your performance is going to suffer because you're not getting enough fuel. So then it will decrease even more. So yeah, on a one-time basis, 7,000, 8,000, you might be able to do, but try doing it 5, 6, 7 days a week.
Yeah, not right. You and plus there's going to be again people could do it, but there's got to be some compensation
Yeah.
from a hunger standpoint, and just it would make it like you would have to like really go out of your way to do it, and then you'd feel like absolute dog shit. But yeah, when you look at this thing that we're talking, the graph here, it looks like most people again are in that like 1200 to 30. Most people are going to be in that 1200 to 3600. Man, I would hate to be. I mean, if you look, it's interesting. There's some people like at 80, like there's a female at 80 kilograms. It's like at 1200, like 1200 calories. So there are outliers and stuff right there. But again, most people are going to
Yeah.
be in that like 1200 to what, 3600 range.
Yeah, I think at least from what we've seen, and this is, I guess, supporting what we've seen, your that's metabolic rate or just your energy expenditure, there's a good chance it's lower than you think it is, which sucks. It's not
Yep.
what we want to hear. I don't want to hear that. I'm actually scared because I could lie down and find mine out pretty easily if I just got someone up here. And I don't want to know mine because I'd be like, man, it's that low? It's like,
Yeah.
what? But yeah, there's a good chance where like a large portion of the population is going to hover around or in between certain values. So like you said, like 1200, 13, maybe 12 to 1400. It's just there's a decent chance where a large portion of the population is going to be in between that range. And what really comes into play after that, and what really makes the difference is your activity factor. So what are you doing outside of that? Because you can change that, and you can change that quicker than your resting metabolic rate. So maybe you have a low RMR and that you're like, oh man, it's low. And that's a bummer. What can you do outside of that to increase that energy expenditure? What can you do outside of that not doesn't take I don't know, a lot of effort, like brain power, lowest hanging fruit, like just the cliche stuff, park further away, just go on a quick walk, walk your dog, things of that nature. You might not be thinking about it, but it's gonna make a difference.
Yep. Yeah, no, it does. And like you said, that's the one that's the most modifiable. And we, again, hey, again, you take your RMR, it's low, but just understand that's one piece of it. But then again, like you said, there are some modifiable factors that you can change there. A couple things in terms of changing that. I'm assuming energy balance is something that could probably modify that, right? So it's, if you take your either RMR or again, somehow you get access to doubly labeled water and you can do it, I would imagine that you're like that would change slightly in terms of the energy balance you're like currently in.
Yeah, like whether you're in a deficit or surplus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you're in a surplus, there are studies that show, I think some big authors that do it, they specifically publish like overfeeding research and they show if you're in a surplus, longitudinally, you're in a surplus, your RMR is going to increase. Whereas if you're in a deficit for an extended period of time, then we're going to see some metabolic adaptation. So your metabolism essentially is going to decrease, for lack of a better term. And your body will also, you can combat this if you know of it, if you know this is going to happen. And this is probably what happens for a lot of people on a prep when they're on a bodybuilding prep. They're in a deficit for an extended period of time. Their body naturally just makes them be less active throughout the day than they otherwise would have been. And so everything decreases. The total daily energy expenditure decreases. And if you know that's going to happen, you can combat it. I'm going to make myself go for walks throughout the day with this. But definitely a surplus over extended period of time, you're going to see an increase in your metabolism, and a deficit, you're likely going to see a decrease.
Yeah. And then you did a thermogenic paper. So I'm curious, is there anything, can that be something that increases your resting metabolic rate and total daily energy expenditure?
Yeah. So basically, the product we use, it was from EHP Labs, which I would say relatively popular company, Australian based. And the product we use, it's basically just an energy drink. They marketed it as a thermogenic, as a ready to drink thermogenic product. And a lot of people are familiar with OxyShred. It's just the drink version of that, just the carbonated drink version, the energy drink. Tasted great. I liked it. But yeah, in general, so with those products, it has caffeine. Caffeine, if somebody says caffeine doesn't increase rest metabolic rate, I don't know what they're looking at. It increases it to an extent. Now, the thing is, it increases it, but how long does that last? So for our paper, they had a decent amount of caffeine part for our paper because the recommended dose, I think it was like 1 to 2 doses. Each can had 180 milligrams. They had two, so 360 milligrams straight to the dome, basically. And then we looked at RMR. Now we went 100 minutes post their baseline RMR, so 100 minutes, so almost 2 hours, and it was still elevated. So it was still significantly elevated, but we don't exactly know like how long would that have lasted. Research has gone, the furthest I've seen, I think, is 3 hours, and it was still elevated in terms of like caffeinated energy drinks or thermogenic products. But that is a way to increase it acutely. So acute increases on that day. Regardless, I don't, the degree of increase is always going to vary person to person, but you can be pretty confident that when you drink that caffeinated product, that energy drink, that thermogenic product, when you take the scoop of the thermogenic, it's not going to decrease. So you're at least not going to be hurting it based off, you're not going to be adding anything from the decrease that's already happened from your deficit.
Yeah, so it sounds like from my understanding, like when they do this, it's like from like okay, so yes, in the short term, you'll see your energy expenditure increase. So people hear that and they automatically think that means that they're like, hey, I'm going to be in a bigger deficit, and that's going to lead to fat loss. But to me, from my understanding, that's not what happens, but you do see that increase in energy expenditure in the short term. But it's like you said, it's just then. I wonder also if there's like a habituation effect where your body kind of compensates over time, where it's maybe initially it's a little bit higher, but maybe if you do it regularly, there your body adapts to it,
Yeah.
right? And it's not as big as it was initially. But then also, my understanding too is anytime there's an increase in energy expenditure, so whether we do that through all the things we talked about or you add in a thermogenic drink like this, what people don't understand is the body is very good at it senses energy deficits, it senses these things. And so other things ramp up that make it hard to like actually sustain that as well
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. There's some things about our bodies that are dumb. Like people don't understand that muscles, they just turn off and on based off the brain. But other things, your body is super, super smart, super intelligent. If you look at energy availability, which is basically just saying your body has all these functions to keep it alive, and it'll modify and adjust these functions based off how much energy you're giving it, how much food you're eating. So, like you mentioned, your body, it's going to notice that increase in rest of metabolic rate from this product, and it'll adjust certain items. That's another thing to consider. And then it'll get used to that increase, like you mentioned, that habituation, and it won't impact or influence your body as much anymore. Because I think anyone that drinks caffeine has probably got to the point where like your caffeine intake is so high that you don't really feel it anymore.
Yep.
So it's the same thing.
So again, I think with that, on this part of it, sounds like you guys like main thing looking at the metabolic side of things was one to just kind of look at the equations and to see how they stack up with everything. So then really that's going to lead people to be like, okay, and I'm assuming this helps with research studies, but then also just in the field too, right? If we can get equations that are more accurate, that's going to help. It's going to decrease the time that you have to worry about making those potential adjustments
Yeah.
that you were talking about. But at the end of the day, if someone is just trying to find how many calories they burn throughout the day, best way to do it is doubly labeled water, which most people aren't like, people don't have access to that. So we have to use these equations. Each one's going to have potential error with it. And anytime you do a calorie calculator, whatever it is, it's just getting you within the ballpark. And from there, as you said, we really have to adjust based on where body weight's trending. And that's going to be your best kind of guiding factor there. But so two questions off that. I guess I was asking you what would be a good reason to potentially get body fat percentage. I'm assuming this could potentially be one reason, like one way that this could
Yeah.
potentially help is this gives you a more accurate reading in terms of your total daily energy expenditure if you're trying to find that for whatever reason there. And then I guess my final question on this would be you said Tinsley's 2019 is the best kind of equation for more athletic populations.
Yeah. So the one thing that I should have mentioned with any prediction equation, the most important thing is so finding out when that equation was developed, what population was it developed from? So did they use individuals with obesity, an active population, a specific group of athletes, and essentially just try to match that population as close as possible to the population you're going to apply it to. So if it's yourself, try to find an equation that was developed from people as similar to you as possible. And for the Tinsley 2019 paper, that was developed from physique athletes. And the paper is called Rest and Metabolic Rate in Muscular Physique Athletes, I think. And so if you have someone that fits their characteristics or it's you, just go off of that equation. And there is a body mass based and a fat free mass based equation. So if you just stepped on a scale, you can use that one. If you actually did like a DEXA or another device and you have a fat free mass value, you can use that one as well. But regardless, that equation was developed in muscular individuals. And I think I'm sure our study was only the second study to evaluate that equation, to like further evaluate in muscular population. We just need more studies in muscular individuals to look at that equation because it's so new. So we just need more studies. But I would recommend that one for muscular individuals.
Yeah, no, that makes sense because then I could see where if someone like is not very muscular and they use that, then now it's gonna overestimate it potentially. Then at
Yeah,
that point.
there's a decent chance it's going to
Yeah.
overestimate it.
Yeah. Cool. No, that's awesome. I didn't think we were going to end up talking about metabolism, but I freaking love human metabolism, man. It's so interesting and there's a ton of things there. So super cool to chat with you about that. And so I guess again, for people like, so obviously being careful with like getting your resting metabolic rate, it's not going to tell you everything. It's just a little thing. And then I'm assuming obviously things out on the market that people can do. I'm assuming there's same thing with the body fat percentage. There's probably going to be some potential errors with that number
Oh yeah,
anyways.
body composition and rest and metabolism are the same in terms of what's going to influence these. So before we do the assessments, we have everyone adhere to the same instructions. So fast from food and fluid for at least 8 hours, no physical activity for 24 hours prior. We did 36 for mine because we wanted to be extra careful. But I think there might be some research out there showing rest and metabolic rate in particular can be influenced by physical activity going back even longer, which is pretty interesting. But also no caffeine before metabolism assessments, no nicotine, things like that, because just anything that can
Influence.
influence that metabolism. So yeah, it's definitely they're very similar in terms of what do we have to standardize and consider before we do these assessments.
What's the popular resting metabolic rate thing that people will that they can just is it lumen? Is that the one that I'm thinking of?
Oh yeah, lumen.
What's the accuracy on that? Not to throw them under the bus specifically, but just like these things that you can just get out on the market like that.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know enough about that device to know the accuracy of it, but regardless of what it is, I feel like
I can't think of the name of it.
I
I don't
wouldn't
think it's
put
lumen.
it's the same thing with the portable devices. I would say it's the same thing as the equations. Just use it as a starting point.
Yeah,
You can tell, I guess, like anecdotal evidence if you're using one, you can tell how accurate it is because if you're going off that device and you're wanting to lose weight and you're gaining weight going off the device, then it's most likely not as accurate as you thought it was because it's putting you in a surplus. But yeah, I don't know enough about Lumen, so can't throw them under the bus right now.
just because I hear people that are like, oh, I'm struggling to lose weight. I need to get my resting metabolic rate tested to see if there's something wrong with me. And it's just like, again, we just want to be careful with that. Same thing with the body fat percentage. It's like I just feel like you're trying to maybe reach for something there.
Yeah, I would suggest getting like a blood panel done,
Yeah,
checking your
right. Yeah, something
blood.
like that. Yeah, something like that.
Spend that money on that stuff. I would say
Yeah.
that's probably more important.
Yeah. Cool, man. This was a great conversation. So obviously, in between our last episode and this one, you ended up taking a job, right? You got that at Pennington. So what does that look like for you? What do things look like for Christian now? Because I think last time we talked, you had just defended your dissertation. We didn't know where you're going. Now at the end of this one, we have a better idea maybe now at this point.
Yes, sir. I guess I officially signed it yesterday. I got the official offer letter to do a postdoc, be a postdoctoral researcher at Pennington Biomedical Research Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. For 2 years, I will be working under Dr. Eric Ravison and Dr. Stephen Heimsfeld. And essentially, I will be doing their projects center around a really cool topic that people love talking about right now, GLP-1s, GIP-1s, and essentially the projects are looking at metabolic adaptation. Why do some people lose weight quicker than others? Why do some lose weight slower? When they're losing weight, how much of it is fat, muscle? What can we do to combat the muscle loss when we're losing weight? Because we'll actually be able to look at how much muscle are they using, skeletal muscle, how much muscle are they actually losing? And is the muscle that they're losing, is it different than how much muscle you would normally lose in a caloric deficit? Because I think that's something people need to consider is when you're in a caloric deficit for an extended period of time, there's a good chance you're going to lose some muscle. So when you're on these weight loss medications, you're losing muscle, but are you losing more than what you would be losing otherwise? I don't know. But that's something I'll get experience with, be working on, and I'll get to learn new techniques like doubly labeled water, metabolic chamber, MRI, things of that nature. So yeah, it'd be a really cool learning experience. Also, it'll be pretty surreal working under Dr. Eric Ravison and Dr. Stephen Heimsfeld since they pioneered research in metabolism for Dr. Eric Ravison and body composition for Dr. Stephen Heimsfeld. So it'll be surreal working under them too and just honestly just learning all I can for a couple years and then we'll just go from there. But yeah, that's the plan for now.
Cool, man. That's awesome. Congrats. So will you be able to will you be heading any research or anything like that? Or is that going to be after? this?
I guess we'll see how it goes. I know I don't know, but I think somewhere around maybe during the second year, I'll apply for a certain grant that I can get after my postdoc finishes. And it's a grant that an NIH grant that helps you as an early scientist to get going, get your feet on the ground. But also the one of the coolest things I think about Pennington is they have this data repository where all their studies they've done, they have all the data just in there. And you can go look at it, look into it if you're at Pennington, and you can use the data to publish. So like they might have this data on this certain population in this certain area that no one has evaluated yet. And I can just go in there and see if I find something, maybe I do find something, or I can just use it as a learning opportunity. And so I don't know if I'll be heading any studies specifically. Maybe during my second year, we'll see. But yeah, it's the plan for now. I'll see how it goes. Oh, maybe I will be in my first year. I'm not entirely sure.
Awesome. Thanks for hopping on, man. I'm doing this in two different episodes. A ton of great information in here. I was glad we were able to connect again. And we got you on here before you became a big researcher in the field. Had to get you on first here. Christian, really appreciate your time, man. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, dude. First off, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me again. Definitely appreciate it. And I guess the main place that I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, but the main place they can find me is probably Instagram. Yeah, underscore Christian Rodriguez underscore. That's
Cool.
probably the best place to find me, place I'm most active.
Sweet. Awesome. Yeah, we'll make sure we tag all that. And yeah, man, looking forward to seeing what goes on over the next couple of years. And we'll love to get you back on again in the future to chat about some of the stuff that you guys are going to be working on and things like that. So really appreciate it, man. And we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, dude. Thanks so much again for the opportunity. This was great.